Does the budget support job creation? The heavy infrastructure investment should naturally create jobs and boost growth. However, we have observed significant delays and corruption in the management of these big projects. This means that the benefits of the projects are much lower than expected. Prudent public investment management, including a zero tolerance to corruption, will ensure that Ugandans get the desired job and growth for the investment. The budget, like previous ones, has prioritized infrastructure, with works and transport taking 22% of the total budget. On the other hand, social sectors are receiving much smaller amounts. While investing in infrastructure is good to facilitate growth, there is need to create a good balance with the social sector. A fast-growing population comes with increased pressure on social services. If the budget for social services like health and education is not growing to meet the growing population needs, then some people will be left out, especially the poorest. And I think it's right to say that investment in the social sector also promotes development. I think education, and in particular education for girls, is an important factor in promoting development. Health and education cannot wait until the infrastructure has been built. The investment has to be done now. A healthy and skilled workforce translates into productivity. For example, we know that at the moment 50% of the girls do not complete primary school, primary 7. Dropping out before the completion of the primary level means that they will be semi-skilled, most likely unemployed, and a burden to those they depend on. Lastly, I want to mention the growing levels of debt. While we appreciate that debt has been accumulated in order to invest in infrastructure, the growing debt raises serious concern for the future of the state in delivering services to the people. 12% of this year's budget is going to be spent on paying interests on loans. The amount allocated for paying interests is higher than what is allocated to education and health. If the country continues to accumulate debt, future generations will forego services in order to pay off this debt. New ways of generating local revenue need to be sought to reverse this debt trend. I think one of the issues has been mentioned that political decided tax exemption is really a negative for the revenue collection. One of the ways to increase revenue could be through the curtailing of illicit financial flows. For every $1 of foreign aid coming to developing country, $10 leaves as illicit financial flows. Illicit financial flows manifest in different forms, including avoiding taxes, human trafficking, drug trade, illegal arms dealing, smuggling, as well as corruption. If these illegally earned, transferred or utilized funds are recovered, they can potentially reduce the resource constraints of the economy, of the country. So that was my modest contribution. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Anybody with questions for the ambassador will have to ask them from Denmark. And I hope that is very clear. No visas, that's the whole reason that you'll have to sneak in there. I was again reading things. This is sharing information that happens. We do a lot of investments, attract foreign direct investment. And one of the things I'll be asking Geoffrey, this is just to give you a long-term signal ahead of the answer, is that the foreign direct investment that came into this country in the first half of this year was about 363 million. But of this, 100 million was just reinvestment of what profits they had made from here. So it wasn't new money from out there. But thank God they didn't take it away. They could have chosen to take it away. So even leaving it around was good enough, but really would have loved to have more money here. Then the other one, they were lending to each other. So FDI may not necessarily be the answer, but it is part of the answer. So we want to receive it, but also we need to promote domestic direct investment. That question will go to David at a later stage. But right now I want to go to Honorable David Bahati, again to say what ministers say. You can't say anything for a minister. They know what they say. Honorable Bahati, you have about 3 to 4 minutes to say what ministers say. This was your date coming to an end.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to respond to a few questions and concerns, especially by His Excellency the Danish Ambassador to Uganda, about our debt situation. As His Excellency said a few hours ago, our debts remain sustainable. At the moment, our debt portfolio stands at 10.5 billion US dollars. Out of this, 7 is from external sources, and 3.3 is from domestic sources. Our debt to GDP ratio stands at 38%. As a community, we agreed that we should not go beyond 50%, and we don't even expect that in the next 5 years, 6 years, we will have reached 49%. So we are very disciplined. We know how to manage this situation. We know the dangers that can put the debt can put us in. The problem is not acquiring debt. The problem is how you use the debt that you acquire. And that's why we have been focusing on implementation. We know that there have been some projects, some loans that we have acquired, and they have stayed there because we acquired some of these loans without really thorough preparation. That's why now we have focused on some of the criteria we have put in place. A sector cannot acquire a loan now without proper preparedness. One of the other major concerns and how we are handling it is this. The concern that we have is more on the domestic debt, the 3.3 billion, because domestic debt is very expensive. Domestic debt also crowds out the private sector. Government competes with the private sector. So what we're trying to do now is to work out a strategy to restructure this debt into long term, because the debts that we've been having for 5, sometimes even 1 year, 180 days, 3 months, and all that. So what we're trying to do now in terms of strategy is to see whether we can go into long-term bonds so that we can structure out this and then reduce the interest rate. The signals are there. Obero has been talking about the signals. We have been sending the signals. A few minutes ago I was saying maybe your signal reader has a problem, but
UCC knows how to switch off some phones. That's what the problem could be.
Yeah, but the signals are there. So that's the other issue. The other issue is about domestic revenue mobilization, because at the end of the day, the interest on this debt and also the repayment of the principal comes from the revenue that you collect yourself. So we are, as the minister outlined in his speech, we are working out a domestic revenue mobilization strategy, and we'll be launching it out in September. We think that we can actually go up to 18% to our GDP in the next 2 years if we work out a good strategy in the next few months in terms of revenue correction. So people should not place the panic button yet about our debt situation. Our debt situation is not going to go beyond what we anticipate. We are not going to go beyond the 50% that we agreed upon as a community in the next 7 years. And after all, in 3 to 4 years, the Minister of Energy was here, we'll be starting to tap into our oil revenue collection. We hope that when we start doing this, we'll be having a lot of some money on our disposal, which we can use to invest in infrastructure, and the money that we have been borrowing out to invest in infrastructure is more or less saved. So the public should not panic that the situation is bad. The only panic that we should go into is when we acquire this debt and we don't use it properly. That's why now we are saying, if you're an accounting officer, we have acquired a loan for you and you are not implementing a project, why are you still there? You should be sacked. Then the other issue I think we need to respond to is the issue of corruption. It's of great concern to all of us, and the government will do its part. We are doing our part, but I also want to appeal to every Ugandan. Some of these corrupt officials do corruption with you. They do these deals with you. Please report them. Don't abet corruption. Don't hide. If you get any information about corrupt officials, please do report. And that's why the president set up now a committee at State House, and will be sending out the free toll numbers where all Ugandans can call. Maybe one day we should be able to really reduce this corruption to almost zero. But I think the most important thing to note is that we have a policy of zero tolerance towards corruption as a party.
Okay.
As a party, we don't sit to promote corruption. We don't encourage corruption. These individuals within our party who are corrupt do it by themselves and for themselves, not for the party. So we want once again to say that our budget, we think that we are focused on the right priorities, the priorities of infrastructure to promote growth. We have invested some reasonable amount of money in the social sector. Yes, the ambassador was talking about the interest rate and loan repayment being the second largest sector by sector allocation. But also it's good news, Your Excellency, Ambassador, that we have the capacity to pay our debt. There are countries who are struggling. You remember Iceland was almost declared bankrupt. Uganda has never defaulted on debt repayment even for one single year. Okay. We have invested quite a lot of money in the health sector because we believe that to have a healthy economy, you must also have healthy people. We're investing in education, especially the point of skilling Uganda, because these jobs need skilled Ugandans, and that's why we are doing that.
Thank you.
We hope that in the next 12 months, and just yesterday, we approved the regulations to our National Planning Authority, and one of the things that we put in the regulations are standards for service delivery. Standards for service delivery. We want all accounting officers. Now we have supplied this budget. The money you have received must be applied to implement the plans that we approved. We have seen people who, after getting money, they divert from the priorities. They start using the resources to areas where we didn't plan. So we are now saying you must apply the budget to the plans that we approved. So we think with this institutional framework that we're putting in place, if we get the right people, then with the other issue that we have been faced with is the issue of decision making. There's a lot of laxity in some of these departments. People take long to decide, and therefore that affects implementation. But we hope in the next financial year we will continue on the path to prosperity, and actually we believe if we maintain at this speed, Uganda can achieve its vision not in 2040 but in 2030.
Thank you.
I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. You see, I said these are things ministers say. They give you the future, they give you the decisions, they give you the challenges the way they see them and how they are planning to tackle them. I was about to add for the minister that possibly the party has zero tolerance to corruption, but unfortunately there are people in government who are not from the party. Could they be the ones who are fronting corruption? but those from the party who are in government, but you don't ask ministers these questions. We just keep thinking aloud.
So everybody in government belongs to the party in one way or the other.
That may not be. Geoffrey, you will be coming on board shortly, but just wait a bit. I have Dickens. Dickens is dressed like a pilot. Are you part of the revival of the airline? You know, let me just say this for a while, that somebody who was seated in one of these airlines in an African country, I'm not going to put a name, when they say this aircraft is going to crash, everybody ran out except one man who said it won't even take off. How can it crash without taking off? But at least we have a pilot. Please convince me. And Honorable Bahati will be leaving us shortly, but we still have the Minister of Finance ably represented by a colleague of mine, Moses Bekabye. So at any one time, Honorable Minister, please feel free to reallocate your resources to wherever the demand is greatest. You don't hold a cabinet minister anywhere past 10 o'clock. He might have signatures to sign and bring in some more money. But we'll be discussing the space he has engaged with the technical person, Moses, who is remaining behind. Dickens, you have a blank check of 3 minutes because you are the new person here. Our audience needs to know, what are you representing?
Thank you very much, moderator. And for your information, I'm not part of the revival, but I'm the Commissioner Customs at the URA. And I would like to pick on one thing that my minister talked about and touch base on why it's very important. The president talked about value addition, commercialization of agriculture. And we all know that agriculture is the biggest employer of our people. But when you look at the numbers, the contribution of agriculture to the tax revenue, it's disappointingly less than 1%. And many of us have talked about the amount of investment government has put in agriculture, and the minister elaborated that you have to look at the wider perspective. But I would also like to add that Ugandans need to understand that government has incentivized the agricultural sector in a very big way. If you are going to be involved in farming, in commercial farming, virtually all the inputs that are used are not taxable. If you look at the fertilizers, the chemicals that we use in agriculture, they are all incentivized. So when you are looking at agriculture, the government has done a lot to promote agricultural sector, leave alone the budget amount that has been announced. And I think it's high time we looked at value addition. When you look at the exports from the agriculture sector, the maize, the beans, all these have been increasing. We've talked about tea. But if we could only add value to our exports, we would be having a lot of earnings. And when there is money in the economy, it means the economy will grow. The second thing I want to say, moderator, is that when the minister reads the budget and the tax measures that have been introduced, when you look at the policy measures, their contribution towards us as URA being able to achieve the target that has been set is very small. The policy measures, some of the policy measures result in a negative tax growth. For example, the motor vehicle ban, it will result in reduction in what? In tax. So what it means is that as a revenue authority, this gap has to be bridged by aggressive and very robust administrative efficiency measures. And that's where our focus will be. And that's where we call upon Ugandans to understand that it is their role to pay tax. And if they don't pay, they should not expect the services from government. But to indicate that as an authority, we are trying to do everything possible to invest in technology, reaching out to taxpayers, being able to do tax education, do compliance activities to make sure that we reach the Ugandans, the taxpayers that are able to pay tax. So the year is going to be busy for us. If someone wants to hide income, definitely we will be competing in objectives to find the income and basically tax it. But we believe that if everybody contributed the little he had to contribute, we will all be able to achieve, and nobody will be carrying any other person's heavy burden. Thank you.
Thank you, Deacons. I was getting worried that you're a pilot and you might fly us tonight. Taxes. I've always said in economics there is what we call dead weight loss. If URA doesn't pick it, it doesn't mean the economy has missed it. It's still within. It's doing something elsewhere. But he has said if you don't pay tax, don't expect services. Now, if I pay tax, I expect services. This is not a question for him. It will be going to Moses downstream later. His own works in finance. He receives all his money. He even sets him the targets, which he's saying is going to be awake to try and meet. But I have a man who carries a bag that I have never seen. Julius, you're going to be speaking to, should we say taxes and agriculture? Should we say agriculture? I really want you to speak for the civil space and this budget. So I'm giving you a half blank check. I've written some zeros there. Decide whether you want to put a 1 or a 2. But speak to that space that you came to speak to. Julius Mukunda. Introduce yourself. People may want to know a little bit more.
Thanks so much, Fred. My name is Julius Mukunda, and I'm the Executive Director for the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group. Fred, I think for me is what is our take on this budget? I think like any other budget, first of all is that you are excited that the government once again has been able to have some extra resources to pump into the economy. And as such, you're expecting that, at least hospitals will have drugs, teachers will be paid, some roads will be paved, or new ones will come on board, farmers will receive some grains or inputs. I mean, there is that benefit that you expect people to have. But I just want to focus my attention in terms of what I would have felt more than what the minister said. Number one is that when you look at the theme of the budget around industrialization and job creation, and they're telling you that more than 60% of the entire population is engaged in agriculture, then you are likely to say, oh, actually I would be interested to see how much is being invested in agriculture. Good enough is that actually money for agriculture has increased from 828 billion to 892 billion. It's a small increment, but we thank government for that. But the minister said something that attracted him. He said he was very proud to talk about NARO, the National Agricultural Research Organization, and said it has brought up new varieties. And remember, we are suffering from the new varieties he was talking about in terms of improved varieties in beans, improved varieties in bananas, and others. And I went back to the budget only to find out that actually NARO's budget has reduced from 84 billion to 62 billion. So if you really want such a kind of an agency to propel you to produce the best varieties so that farmers can have them and then increase productivity and production, which can be able to employ more youth that we have been talking about, to have the maize that should be in the maize meal, to be in the meal, then you begin to question and say probably would have had some better priorities on that one. Secondly, for me, I think the other important element was about investing in markets. And this is something that we've been talking about, is that the farmers of Uganda, specifically, if you tell them that there's a market for vanilla, let me tell you, even in Karamoja, people will grow vanilla because they know there is the market. Ober, my friend, will tell you that in the trading area where they say that there is a deal here, everybody will look for the capital. You won't give them the capital, but they will look for the capital to get that deal. And I think for me, it's high time government needs to invest in looking for markets for agricultural products. Thirdly, for me, it was about the whole idea about the cost of debt. I know the president was got a bit stronger about it. Let us shift the discussion about, let us say, okay, fine, we are sustainable, we haven't hit 50. But what is the cost of debt today? Because when you find out the amount of money we are paying on interest payments is around 2.5 trillion Ugandan shillings. How much are we spending in agriculture? 800 billions. How much are we putting in health? Around 2 trillions. If you look at the tourism, we're talking about 32 billion. So in terms of the cost of overpaying our debt, it is increasing. And I think for me, that is the biggest worry. That in the next 5 to 6 years, probably it might be taking half of our entire national budget. Lastly, I think for me, as part of ensuring that probably we can have more revenues for more commissioner to be able to hit the target, there are two important things that we must do. What is the principle that drives our taxation policy in this country? I think one of the things, the biggest challenge we face in this country is that when we are looking about taxation is about getting revenue, full stop. And if he doesn't hit the target, then he's in trouble. He will get high blood pressure. He must hit the target. And that is the problem. We need to look at tax as part of boosting business. So if we boost business, then we can get more resources. But if we keep on making increments every year, I'm telling you, we are not going to expand our taxation base. It's high time we look at those policies that can be able to boost business. For example, this whole thing about 1% tax on mobile money, Fred, I think it's going to kill business instead, not to boost it. Lastly, we need to seriously look at investing in areas where we have comparative advantage in this country. And I've said it again. We will never beat the Japanese from building cars. We will never. But there is one thing we know or two that will beat them on. And that is growing beans and peas and coffee. We know we can do that better than them. Why don't we invest there seriously? We know we have the gorillas and the Queen Elizabeth National Park. They don't have that. Why can't we invest into that one? Tourism is bringing more money than most of the sectors here. But we are giving them 32 billion Uganda shilling, a pocket change for some ministries. Thank you.
Well, now I know what was in his bag. Some very good ideas on how do we bring it up, but do industries create jobs? That discussion was supposed to take place in Quebec under the G7. Trump decided it shouldn't take place by distorting the agenda. Just a week before, he raised the taxes on his neighbors and his friends, and the entire discussion went to discuss that. But one of the things they really wanted to see was the impact of automation on industry and jobs. That line seems to be no longer the way to go if you want to create jobs. So when I see industries for creation of jobs, I'm like, okay, maybe the maize mills, but not the ones where you compete with the Japanese. So we need to rethink some few things, and narrow, I think that is an important thing that we want to get into. How do we roll out even the very good kind of good variety that the minister talked about? They are not with the farmers because multiplication is missing, and NARO is looking for ways of doing that. But you've raised a very interesting thing. The indicator for the ministry, our government, on the debt is the debt to GDP ratio, 50%. But he has said debt repayment to the budget can also be 50%. But 50% of your budget is going into, now you may not yet have hit the 50 debt to GDP, but you might easily hit the 50% of your budget. Right now, about 30% is getting into that. Moses Bekabi helps with budget things and issues. You don't have to necessarily speak to this now, but you want to speak to what? You have 3 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think let me say the following. The budget has a budget constraint. The budget is a constraint, is a resource constraint. The resources we have today in terms of revenue are constrained. We get about 14% of GDP. Of course, we could get higher. as many people have suggested. I agree with that. We need to invest in improving tax administration, as URA has mentioned, and the minister did outline in his speech measures to improve tax administration. But what I wanted to respond to specifically is to say that although we know that tourism, agriculture, water, and all these sectors, they need resources, we have to prioritize and we have to sequence, because the resources are limited. If we were to provide resources to all these sectors and scatter them around, probably they will not be effective. And if we were to provide money for being effective in all these sectors, then you're looking at probably borrowing $10 billion in a year or something like that. So that's why the government has been investing initially in security, infrastructure, and also social services. Now it's shifting. There is a shift now into commercialization of agriculture, improving production and productivity of agriculture, industrialization, meaning producing agriculture for industry, and adding value to agricultural products, and therefore going into agro-industrialization. That's what we're talking about. In other words, agriculture becomes the basis for industrialization, because that's where we have some comparative advantage. And then also try to address the key issue of long-term finance. I know Richard earlier spoke about the reforms in the pension sector, which have been protracted for a long time. I think we need to complete those reforms in order to unlock private sector finance, in order to be able to finance, have equity finance, to be able to have meaningful PPPs and all those kind of things. The private sector finance resources must be allocated, be triggered from the savings that we're talking about. So we're talking about prioritization. It's not like we are not saying tourism is not a priority. We know tourism brings in quite a lot of money, but also what we are looking at here is partnership with the private sector in all these things. We've been talking about research, Kawanda, and many other research institutions. The best way to leverage research is through partnerships, partnering with the private sector, partnering with the joint ventures, forming joint ventures with large multinational companies that bring in technology, transfer technology to our countries, and being able to utilize that. Of course, there's the issue of how to roll out this research. The minister did mention that, to say through fertilizer, through seedlings, and all those kind of things. They're going to try. This budget is going to try and utilize the research that has come out in terms of better quality seedlings, utilizing technology, fertilizers, and all those kind of things in order to increase productivity. That's why we are looking at. In terms of debt, yes, debt per se is not bad. But there's a component of debt, as I said earlier, that is toxic, and that's domestic debt. Because domestic debt does crowd out the private sector, increase the cost of capital, and all those kind of things. But there is external debt that is still cheap, although interest rates are going up now. Yeah. We can be able to leverage external debt and put it to good use. The key thing is really making sure that we have value for money for every dollar that we invest. Okay, and that means that the projects have to be selected. They have to be in a prudent manner. They have to be analyzed. There has to be good supervision. There has to be monitoring. There has to be supervision, evaluation, and all those kind of things, and ensuring that the governance, the accountability issues are addressed in the utilization of these funds. And this is where the government is focusing right now. Thank you.
We wish you success in that area, because it's actually a big sore throat. Me and you know the battles in that area. We're hoping we'll be able to crack it. I must say congratulations for linking agriculture with agro manufacturing, because we've had a lot of people thinking manufacturing will be Namave. Now, when we open it up to agriculture, we begin to connect the maize and the meal, and possibly we'll now be able to use the electricity. So agriculture is the beginning point, and then to drive the other side, and then recursively they begin to drive each other. Please, my congratulations to the minister on that linkage that came out very strongly. And when you meet the governor, the issue of maintaining the central bank rate where it is, even when he saw that the outlook for inflation might be higher, he still maintained at 9. I think that is a new change that we have not seen in the central bank for quite a long time. That signal was a very good one, and I think people now know the language about signals. I want to get to Richard. You do investments, and there are many people in this town with investment. What do you see in the area of investment options for the private sector in Uganda? We're not talking about yourself with your pension money, but you've been in investment areas, you've been in the banking for quite a lot of time. You're a person who is in a vantage position, as I said, 14th floor, Central Business District. You don't sit up there with many people. What do you see in this economy? What message would you give to a private person about investment options?
First of all, that's a loaded question, because I think the minister did mention that one of the fastest growing areas was obviously construction. And Ugandans still seem to be impressed with investing in infrastructure or in buildings. But you know that if you look at the financial crisis of 2008, if you look at the financial crisis of 2012 in Dubai, if you look at the financial crisis which hit the banks 2 or 3 years ago, real estate is the biggest killer of economies, because obviously it turns a lot of the liquidity into illiquid assets, which is real estate. If there is no demand, that means that people are not able to pay their debt, and that's why we saw a huge NPA coming up, and we've seen that come down. So certainly one of the
NPA is non-performing assets, not National Planning Authority.
Sorry, I'm not.
Now I'll be doing that for you.
Forgive me for using jargon a little bit. So I would say that we've seen certainly a lot of people continue to put a little bit of money in real estate, certainly within the commercial area. We've also seen some bit of segmentation, especially on the retail side. In other words, people who are building their own houses to stay in. And we're beginning to see quite a lot of stock coming up in that area. And I would think that that is quite a huge growing area. But if you look at, we've recently set up a fund together with the European Union, where we are hoping to lend, actually invest as private equity in agriculture. And we've found that we can't actually get good deals. And I've said this on very many fora. There is a big problem with our businessmen, that although they are putting money in based on their family businesses, their family savings, but mostly from banks, from bank short-term lending, there is a problem in trying to find that equity out of the public space or the private space, which means that because of those problems relating to things like corporate governance, the fact that they are not able to open up their businesses, they are not able to bring in the financial sector to look at their financials, fearing URA, not look at their taxes. So we find that that has sort of meant that businesses are not able to expand using private or even public equity. So having analyzed all that, I would say that the biggest growing areas continue to be trading, unfortunately, and you can see that that is what has been driving private sector credit, and I think that whole area has been articulated by the previous lady who was on the panel, who basically said that in spite of all the impediments or the hindrances that government puts in place with regard to tax and pricing and all those things, we still find that people are ready to trade rather than to actually manufacture, which is where you would want to do that. And I think that the whole issue around marketing, I think perhaps if that was dealt with, maybe we might be able to get more investment in manufacturing, with the fact that if you can get the quality right, you can get the transport of the product back into the market, or even into the export market where quality control seems to be very high, then we might be able to drive that side of business. So in a nutshell, I would say that equity continues to be, impediment, especially public equity. Credit from the commercial banks tends to be very expensive, therefore impedes expansion. And then, of course, the barriers of entry relating to quality and also product marketing, comparing it with what we are able to import rather than what we're able to make here, continues to be the big impediments to dropping that. And we continue to see a lot of expansion, especially in the real estate side, which people are ready to gamble on, I think, and wait for perhaps the time when oil comes, and then there will be hopefully demand, which will then increase both the acquisition of property and also the acquisition or the increase in requirement for commercial property.
Thank you, Richard. And I hope Richard Asubo, the head of Financial Intelligence Authority, told us part of what is driving real estate is money laundering. People just dumping their money there. And the budget said they are going to tighten that. So I don't know whether that is going to burst the bubble in the real estate. If they do succeed, some things are not easy to deal with. But also there is the poverty aspect. The demand side on the economy is quite limited, because every investor is looking at who will buy what I'm going to produce. So if we still go back and say majority of Ugandans in the income side, in the employment side, are earning 200,000 a month, I don't think that is a market to write home about for anything. And that's why sometimes with my friends in URA, I say that even when you find these guys, you realize they fall below the threshold of income taxation. You will have found them, but then you realize there is nothing to tax. So should we be looking for them in the first place? Maybe we should, to prove that. But there is this whole point we have said, and as Richard rightly put it, it is easier to trade in this country than to do the manufacturing. But that trade is really distorting us, that we are losing over 2 billion in terms of the deficits that Trump is fighting with his colleagues in the European Union, Canadians, Mexicans, Chinese. Is Uganda going to launch a trade war? Me and you will discuss that in the morning, not for today. Geoffrey, how do we drive domestic direct investment? Richard has given us a snapshot of some of the difficulties that people are facing in terms of opportunities for investment, but there are those with some of these opportunities. Every time I see people planting eucalyptus, I'm like, I wish they had planted maize, because maize gives more returns 2 seasons a year. By the time the other guy harvests eucalyptus in 10 years, you possibly are home and dry with some money. David, what do you see? Geoffrey, rather. Thank you.
Yeah, at the end of the day, really, I wish the minister was here, because, anyway, the representative is here. At the end of the day, debt, equity, real estate, those are all asset classes. And what I wanted to emphasize when the minister was here was that signal to each of these asset classes. For example, in this budget, the signal remains the same. This is inflation targeting. This is the signal which has been there year on year for all the previous budgets. But the direct signal to jobs, which translates into jobs targeting, is not there. The signal to domestic direct investment, which is domestic savings, is not there. The savings variable is still a negative. If you put money in a savings account, at the end of the day, bank charges, inflation and so on, you end up in a negative. Those signals need to be direct. Fortunately, the minister has agreed, when we were sitting on that table, that he is actually interested in this conversation. It is very, very important to have this conversation, because, once again, as I said, these are all asset classes. When they are performing well, the economy grows with jobs. if you're eyeing only the signal, if you're only targeting inflation, the economy can grow. But on a net basis, that is what we call jobless growth. So, I just want to illustrate this matter and emphasize this matter of signals. Where is the signal to the diaspora? Richard mentioned, I think in passing, about the depreciation. It is important because if you send the right signal to the diaspora, we will have maybe more remittance to this country, maybe by a factor of 3, 4, even more. But there's no signal to diaspora remittances. There's no deliberate signal to diaspora remittances. These remittances come by pure accident. Pure accident, because somebody is sick somewhere, because school fees is needed somewhere, and yet there are jurisdictions where deliberate signals are sent to attract diaspora money.
Maybe some of them are building houses.
Yes, yes.
The real estate
they are
now.
building houses. Again, that's a good point, Fred. The difficult, and Richard here will attest to it. This market, because of lack of appropriate signals, in the real estate sector, it presents as a contractor market. It's not a developer market. Therefore, the cost per square meter is difficult. Is difficult. But we are saying that it doesn't have to be like this. We are saying we need to engage. We can do much better. The consensus outside there is that this economy can perform very, very well. By far. Why? Because Ugandans are themselves the biggest investors in their own economy. Incidentally, our colleague from the Ministry of Finance says that the domestic you said something about the domestic debt
Yes.
Being toxic. It is not. It's the best debt to have. The FDI which you are referring to is actually the most toxic. Maybe there will be another occasion where we can demonstrate empirically, because the dollar which comes into Uganda from say Denmark, by the time it arrives, Danish money is good, but the one which comes from the USC, the one which comes from say America,
I thought they were all green.
The World Bank, for example, by the time it reaches here, it is nearer 20 cents. Are we together? When a dollar leaves Washington and it reaches here, it is nearer 20 cents. But when we are paying back, we are paying not only the nominal 20 cents, but even the 80 cents we didn't receive. Those calculations are there, they can be done. And once you go through it, you'll find that domestic direct investment, which is derived from domestic savings, is better because the whole value chain is domestic, including the jobs component.
Okay. Yep. I think we're going to get to Richard. Yeah. I should have put somebody in between those three gentlemen for reasons. Yeah. Economics, we deal with the relationships. Moses says domestic debt is toxic. I'm tempted to agree with him going by the debt service. But the bulk of that debt is being held by Richard. So I don't know whether I need a fire extinguisher around there.
40%. Actually, first of all, I'd like to make just a couple of observations and just sort of supplement on the ideas that Geoffrey has raised and also Moses did raise a little bit earlier on. And first of all, is to make a statement. Capital is the biggest coward. I'm sure you know that. As soon as anything happens in the country, capital will disappear. And that's what we've seen. You recall that when we had this letter on social media where a letter was written to the Minister of Energy regarding the Umeme concession, we've seen that the turnover on the stock exchange, the Uganda Stock Exchange, has gone down by 80%. The price of umeme is now 300. It was about 450 at the time that letter was doing the rounds. We also know that not only did it affect the umeme counter, but it also affected the DFCU counter, which actually has done well in terms of pricing, given their integration or their acquisition of Crane Bank. But you know, that good news has, notwithstanding, has actually affected the turnover, and it also affected the turnover of Stanbic Bank, which was the other high-performing counter on that. And the point I'm trying to make is that we just need to be careful what we send out into the market, because people who own capital are the biggest cowards. They will take their money as soon as they come. But having said that, I think one of the signals I would have loved the minister to give today is to make a very strong statement and say, for example, next year we are going to ensure that, say, the best performing companies on the in the telecom sector should actually list on the stock exchange and raise local capital. We should see the companies in the industrial sector, things like Kinyara as an example, or any other of these businesses that are actually performing very well. They should raise capital on the stock exchange so that we can, we increase the intermediation out of equities. First of all, it would increase the savings rates of the locals, but it will also mean that people who now are looking for an alternative asset class to invest in, apart from going into real estate, can now come into equities or into stocks and actually increase their wealth. But it would also mean that the people who are out there looking at this market would say, let's go into Uganda and actually bring in this capital that we are actually holding out there, because the returns that you get on the stock exchange is gone up by about 16 or 17% this year. We can get these returns. But we didn't see that. And I think that if we only rely on debt, which is what I hear everybody saying, let's go for bilateral debt, it is very, very expensive. You all know that one of the biggest projects we would like to do this year is the Ginger Road Expressway. And I think that rather than just look for debt, why can't we look for equity so that we can get cheap capital coming in to help us develop this place?
The very good thing is the person who will be speaking to those within the technical discussions, Moses, is here with us. And I can actually hear you that if you send the wrong signal, I hope the word signal is now clear to everybody. If you have ever held a phone, the mere fact that you can listen to somebody from across the seas is the signal. And it can be a wrong signal. You hear dogs barking instead of the other person talking. When the minister says we want to invest in energy distribution, who is at the forefront of energy distribution? It's umeme. What signal are you sending about umeme? People run out of umeme. So aren't we shooting ourselves in the foot? Because these are the kinds of things we want to be saying. Are we talking the same thing? Because if you can't really deal with the umeme issue, you are going now to begin borrowing to invest in distribution. And then people would have brought in their money equity-wise to do the investment in the distribution, and you deal with only generation and transmission. Now I think that's the kind of the mixing in the signals. There is another signal that the budget brought. The president says, no problem, I have my money. But when you look at his budget, URA is 50%. Literally the other 50% is going to be borrowed. And as soon as people sensed that, I have seen the last 2 months interest rates have been going up. Because they know government is going to be looking for 16, 17 trillion within a year. They can find it with the World Bank, but Uganda usually say the World Bank is slow. They give us 0.5%, 10 years of grace, 40 years, but they are slow. And everybody is watching that to say, this government badly needs money. If you don't give me 17%, I'm sitting on my money. So those are the signals we're talking about, and want to say, how do we clear the air and make sure the economy grows with shared prosperity, with jobs? Moses.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll start by trying to clarify a few things. One, domestic debt is about the relationship between fiscal policy and monetary policy. Okay? And that relationship sets the price incentive or price structure of the economy in terms of inflation, in terms of your exchange rate, in terms of the cost of capital. And there is a big difference between domestic debt and foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment is you are attracting foreign capital into your economy. And it's of two types. One is short-term foreign direct investment in terms of portfolio investment in treasury bills and so on, also equity. But also there's long-term debt which comes into investment of productive sectors such as now oil and gas, industry, and all those kind of things, manufacturing, multinational corporations and so on. That kind of foreign direct investment cannot just run away. Of course, short-term foreign direct investment is very timid. As you raise noise, it goes away because it's very liquid. It can just fly overnight. Okay? But it also has a benefit because it puts countries to try and manage things prudently, because it punishes you the next day in case you are not prudent in terms of what you're trying to do. What I also mentioned earlier was foreign borrowing. Foreign borrowing, as opposed to domestic borrowing, is much more favorable in our context today because our capital markets, our financial sector, is not as developed as, for instance, the financial sector of the Western countries or America and so on. So here, if you're concentrating on domestic debt, for instance, our stock of debt is 33% domestic, but the debt service, the amount of money we spend to service this domestic debt is 3 times what we spend on foreign borrowing. All the monies we borrowed over the last 40, 30 years. Right now, we started borrowing domestically, aggressively, over the last 5 years. But we are paying 3 times more in terms of servicing domestic debt compared to what we borrowed externally. So that's why I said in the present context, if we aggressively increase domestic borrowing, we're just hurting the economy. We are sending the wrong signals in the economy. The relationship between fiscal and monetary policy becomes complicated because of the effects, the negative effects through the economy, both on the monetary side and also on the fiscal side, to deal with those negative effects. The second issue I wanted to comment on is I mentioned it earlier, and the need for us to develop and tap into our private savings, okay, in order to enhance financing through equity, private equity finance. That's good. It will be very extremely good, especially if our people can invest in these investments, factories, and so on. There is something I needed to comment on very, very briefly. We've said it is better to trade than to invest, right? Even when the taxes are 175%.
That's the signal that's coming through.
But there is something that we forget here, and we need to address collectively with the private sector and so on. It's the issue of entrepreneurship. It's the issue of skills to be able to leverage on productivity, because productivity requires specialized skills. So how do we get these skills? There are some countries, I've seen countries in Europe or even America, they have programs like apprenticeship. China has benefited a lot by sending their people to America initially. For the last 30 years, they've been sending their people, placing them in factories to learn skills, to understand, to benefit from research, and to take this knowledge back to their countries. We need to be doing these kind of things, because if we don't do that, then we're going to remain in the trading area, because moving from that to an area where you need productivity is harder. You need skills to do that. That's the comment I just wanted to make on the other side. The third comment, just a little bit on inflation. Responding to my colleague Onego Bell, inflation targeting. Inflation targeting is a management tool. But the key issue here is maintaining a stable economic environment, which is a prerequisite for high economic growth, creating jobs. If you don't have a stable economy, everything, there's no planning. The private sector cannot plan. Everything becomes very difficult. The cost of living goes up every day, and the welfare actually is hard. The people's welfare is hard. So it's extremely important that as a prerequisite for doing other things, for adding on the other things we are talking about that bring about productivity, we need to have a stable foundation. And this is making sure that we have low inflation, we have a stable exchange rate, we have interest rates which are affordable. In other words, they're in the range when you get profit, you're able to service your debt and do all these kind of things. So it's extremely important that we have a very strong macroeconomic base from where we're starting.
Thank you, Moses. I remember the time when we used to say inflation is a fever, that if you have a fever, you really need to call it. But the question we possibly never answered is what was the problem that caused the fever? And reading through the documents around the budget, it looks like the thing that has been controlling our inflation, contributing significantly, is agriculture. The moment you have food prices going down because production was good and healthy, it is also a contribution. So I think there is a double-barreled gun there, that we can boost our production, also as a means of dealing with inflation, but that requires low interest rates, which are the complexities he's talking about here. On how do you balance out these many things? Audience, please, any questions for any of these individuals? Now I see 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and I will 6. I will be getting to you shortly. Dickens, you'll be getting ready. You have Slaughter towards the end to say something about the taxes. Did I say number 1, and then number 2, Agnes, number 3, number 4, 5, and 6? I will definitely end with insurance, and then we'll round back and get to a close. Just be taking 2 minutes. We have very little time to wind up.
Mr. Moderator, I just wanted somebody to talk a little bit about the population growth as in the mix.
Okay, good. Your place is down there. I hope one of the questions about population. 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes each. You have just 15 minutes to wind up this show. We want to go and see the aftermath of the World Cup. And we also want to prepare for Eid. There is pilau cooking already.
Thank you very much. My name is Alan Senyondwa. I'm from Uganda Manufacturers Association. And I would like to throw out a few sentences out there, and then I can debate on this. Number 1, there is no developed country which is not called industrialized, although most of them are in services sector. Number 2, I just want to throw out the conundrum on the dilemma we're in this country. Following points. Number 1, the service sector contributes 53% to GDP and contributes 67% of your taxes. The manufacturing or the industrial sector contributes 23% to this GDP and contributes 33% of the taxes. And we have the agricultural sector, which is contributing about 24%, contributing 1%. Now, that's already big enough. Secondly, we have a huge informality in the country. I think the formality in this country is 53%. Now, this is the dilemma you're finding us in as manufacturers. Okay, on the one side, we don't have our farmers organized to help us have enough supply for us to produce well. On the other side, you have electricity tariffs up in the roof. You have interest rates up in the roof. You have lack of funds. On top of that, the tax man is on our doors. We can't run away. We are in one place. On top of that, you have this wonderful theme: industrialization for job creation and shared prosperity. How are you going to solve that dilemma?
Thank you. Thank you. Agnes? Thank you for keeping the time. 2 minutes, because we are winding down the time.
Thank you, Doctor, and thank you, panelists. Chirabo is the other name because Doctor has mentioned the Agnes bit of it. I'm the Executive Director for Food Rights Alliance. And Doctor, you're talking about signals. I just wish to inform this gathering here that the signals that are being picked in this room are not the signals the biggest proportion of this population is picking. Actually, if we are talking about signals, the biggest part of Uganda's population has no network, there are no masts, there is no outreach. So there is a very big gap.
Even from Moses' budget?
There is nothing. And I'm telling you, what we are talking about here, they cannot pick the language, they cannot pick the signals that we are talking about. They can actually not identify with what we are discussing here, and therefore cannot be part of that shared prosperity that we are talking about. And I think we need to build masts, we need to extend the network, we need to make sure that the biggest part of the population is included in this signal business that we are talking about here, meaning that they get included in the economics of this country. And Mr. Chair, I also wanted the panelists to help me understand, at this point in time, can demand and supply adjudicate the game of the market and redistribute the signals among the population equitably? And lastly, the advantage we are having and why people think that the agriculture sector maybe is contributing less, it is an absence of signal. It is only because there is the majority of the population in Uganda here that can feed breakfast, lunch and dinner without actually spending a shilling. And if we are to cost all that, maybe we would have extended the signals and communicate to each other. Thank you, Chair.
The signal message she's talking about is not to MTN, but definitely it can borrow from the MTN tagline of everywhere you go. Everybody needs to be part of this, but as you said, some people are not understanding what was the minister reading. GDP, percentage, taxes. They really want, you know, we're going to talk about horse.
John Walugembe from the Federation of SMEs. When I looked at the budget, very good heading, but there's a disconnect with the content. Talking about industrialization, talking about...
Your signal has gone off. Please, somebody needs to help. We can hear you here, but there are people, audience out there also need to hear you.
So, the how is not there. There are a lot of assumptions. One, there's an assumption that if you have a road, if you have electricity, people will set up industries. Wrong. No intervention on the supply side. You only see giving out money to youth groups and women groups come together and start. These are novices. Entrepreneurship cannot be taught. So, in my opinion, we need to sit down and say, how do you assist small business? It's difficult to run a business in this country, gentlemen.
Yes.
Some of us in the private sector, it's terrible. Even navigating URSB to register a company, it's completely...
You are telling me that's why I don't have any business.
Exactly.
The mortality rate was too high, so I decided.
Mr. Dixon from URA, a TIN number. I spent a week getting a TIN number. System is down. What? So those are things that we need to resolve. The entire ecosystem for business is struggling, and Julius mentioned it. Don't just tax. Don't kill the hen that is going to hatch the... Okay, I can't finish that. But anyway,
you've made the point.
It will hatch something.
You've made the point.
Thank you very much.
I was asked that question between the chicken and the egg. What should Uganda do? And I said Uganda has no choice. It ate its chicken. It's only left with an egg. Thank God the egg was already fertilized. We need to handle it with care. And that's, I think, what Moses is dealing with. Yes,
thank you very much. Moderator, my name is Paul Mafabi. I'm the Director for Environmental Affairs in the Ministry of Water and Environment. And I think talking environment, I look like the odd man out of this whole discussion. But I think there's some relevance to the issue of water and environment in these signals.
Yes.
And that signal has been missing. And I think Moses did raise an issue that, well, let's keep postponing the water issues, let's keep postponing the environment issues until when we are ready. Forgetting that as you postpone, actually your efforts to even find a solution are not going to come. You just need a little drought, and the country was brought actually to its knees. Because there was a drought, we had not stored enough water, we were not actually capable of sustaining the whole growth process. So, as you continue to plan to wait in investing in the natural resources, remember that by the time when you want to invest, they will not be there. And moderator, let me just bring the point home. Minister of Energy said we want to supply more energy, and it's true. And that energy is electricity. Electricity is driven by water. For water to be maintained, you need to ensure that the catchments are properly protected.
Yeah.
Now, so our investment model from the environment perspective, from the water perspective, is not correct, because there will be no water, and therefore there will be no electricity, and therefore there will be no development. Thank you.
I think you've really woven in quite a number of things, touching also on population, which is very dangerous to the environment, but also our land policy. Somebody gets his land and decides to do what they want to do with it, and sometimes this is the only catchment area for water, and they destroy it because it is their land. Now, how we really need to address some of these real issues through these budgets to protect the environment. You have the floor, sir. 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Frederick Muhumuza. My name is Bonnie Kagaba. I teach at Makerere University Business School. Julius, thank you so much for the work you're doing with CSBAC. And my question is really coming to you because you've captured very good kind of events when the local people are talking to you when the budget is going to be read. Doctor, economic growth is conventional, known to create jobs. But my worry is, I think there is a problem with the data from WUBOS. The GDP has expanded, but it's a jobless growth. Ugandans look at the situation we are seeing now, and they wonder, where is the money that the minister is talking about? What am I trying to say? Today, a $27.9 billion budget has been passed. But divided by population, which Mr. Richard said, I mean, population as if it's competing with the growth. Now, so when you look at that, there is something that should be done, because Ugandans are wondering, first of all, the population is competing with the growth, that is one, and then the development in the labor force cannot catch up with the what? With the employment that is created. So there is a problem there. So people from the policy implementation side help us. Otherwise, there is a problem. Next point is on tax, and it goes to Dickens. Thank you so much in URA, but you need to widen the tax base, not to deepen it. I was chanced to walk around with His Excellency Morgans, and we visited one market in Kampala here. I will not disclose it. The chairman told us that a day they have over 1,000 vendors, and they make 100,000 profit. 100,000 times 1,000 vendors, that's 100 million. Now, times maybe 26 days in a month, those are 2.5 billions that are not taxed. So there was a program called Tax Registration Expansion Program. I don't know where it ended, where URA was trying to connect with URSB and together with KCCA so that they can, interest the informal sector to come formal, and then we create some areas of taxation. But as a way of taxing this established MTN on 1% transaction tax, you're scaring investment.
Dickens will speak to that.
Yeah, so Dickens just go on of seeing how can we widen the tax so that we can interest investment. Otherwise, many people are going to continue in the informal sector, and it's accounting almost 70% of the economy, and they are not paying taxes. The few, the Dr. homes are here, you're increasing their salaries at Makerere, and again you're taxing it. My friend, there is a problem. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I have no salary in Makerere, by the way. So when they go on strike, I'm absent. Dickens will be speaking to the issue of the registration, those relationships that you're having with people in there. By the way, these are 100 vendors. They pay tax. They may earn it when they go to buy water. He has his VAT there. When they go to buy airtime, he has some things there. I think Hadija took us through these things. All these taxes that importers do, they pass them on to us. For them, they are just collectors. So it's not entirely true that if I don't pay income tax, I haven't paid taxes. They actually are paying consumption taxes. And that's the design. Because we can't chase all of them. It's costly. But you can catch them when the cows have come to drink the water. That's where the crocodile usually is. Not that URA is a crocodile. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you.
Michael Orachosinda is my name. I'm a human rights advocate. Mine will go to the technical man representing the minister, Moses. You talked very well about skilling. You talked very well about skilling, and you also had a very good deliberate budget for the previous 3 years, trying to boost education in terms of UPE, to mention but a few. My concern, therefore, is that when I see 50% of the girl child not accessing anything past P7, when you mix that with skilling, which group are you targeting in terms of skilling when we have this high level of dropout in school? And as a human rights advocate, I get concerned when we talk about passing it on to the next generation. Whom are you looking at? Thank you very much.
Very important question. A lot of our people are not going beyond primary 7. Shouldn't we put the skills within that same space? I have a lady there. I have, should I end with a gentleman? I will definitely end with a lady. So a lady, a gentleman, and a lady. And I close the submissions for now.
Thank you very much. My name is Olive Lumonya, Country Director, SOS Children's Villages, Uganda. Mine goes to Moses. I noted in the budget that you've increased the taxes on on juices by 15% and reduced on soft drinks by 12%. Would you be able to explain what that means? The second one is what is the government going to do differently in order to promote manufacturing? Because Hadija ably explained that even with the highest taxes, Ugandans are preferring trading. So if we are going to trigger employment, we should be focusing on driving manufacturing as opposed to trading. So what are we going to do differently in order to trigger manufacturing? To add on that, if you look at the young people, we are pushing them into skilling, from my experience. We are pushing them into entrepreneurship, but are we pushing them into that for self-employment alone? If it's for employment, then we need the factories, we need the manufacturing to provide employment for these young people. And I think that's what China, the people who are being trained all over, will go back and do something in their country. We don't seem to have that in the manufacturing. Thank you.
And the two manufacturers in the room have told us how difficult it is. The high-end manufacturing, Uganda Manufacturers Association, and also the SME. We really need to rethink and think. Moses, some of these things, me and you can discuss them along there. By the way, I can answer Moses' questions, but that will be in my own capacity, so I'll be an impersonator. Is that the English? I had to pay money to learn English, so forgive me. Insurance.
Thank you, Fred. I have just, one is a question, one is a comment. The first one is on, of course, the budget vis-a-vis certain things that have happened. I read in the papers recently, and I don't know whether it's been focused, that the central bank made a 500 billion loss. Has that been factored into the budget going forward? What is the implication? Is our money safe in terms of the treasury bills and whatever, knowing that there was a loss of 500 billion?
Richard wouldn't be here if it wasn't safe.
That's the question. Then the second one is, of course, mobilizing of savings is a forte, which is basically savings through NSSF and through insurance. And I think much as the minister mentioned that there was a slight improvement from the insurance sector, I think the insurance is currently sitting at 600 billion, but has a capacity to double or triple, which will also have a ripple effect in this economy in forms of job creation, being able to make sure that the assets are saved so that these assets that can get destroyed by calamities are overcome. So where do we have this sustained focus on insurance to help on mobilizing savings? Which savings will help us to have long-term? Because life insurance is long-term savings, and we need these long-term savings to drive the economy. Thank you.
Very interesting discussion. I've always said long-term finance is either pension or insurance. If pension is 10 trillion, insurance is 600 billion, we really have a long way to go to raise up some of these things. I think it was wrong even to say the central bank made a loss. The central bank can't make a loss. It's not a business entity that earns for profit. It just didn't make the money, but didn't make a loss. You have the floor.
Thank you, Doctor, and the panelists. I noted that all the important... I'm Grace Mkwaya from Platform for Labour Action. I'm the Executive Director, and we work with informal sector workers. I noted that the taxes for mobile money were increased, and when you see the informal sector workers, many people depend on these small-scale workers, and entrepreneurs depend on social media for marketing and for doing their businesses. And I don't know if this will help in creating jobs, because that is a concern. Also, I saw increases in sectors like education, health, and these are all commendable. But we need to see these policies being implemented, and also joint planning by the different government entities to realize the job creation we are talking about. Also, the youth have been trained in agriculture, tourism, hospitality, but where are these industries and institutions, and how will they access them? I didn't see how they are going to access these industries, and also, do they have accesses to resources like land and other resources to ensure that they can carry out this entrepreneurship? Because I felt like the government's role or the state's role is being taken off in case of social protection, and the poor will remain more poor if these are not looked into. Thank you.
Important observations that go beyond just the budget and the numbers, but what we see in the economy. From the financing side, and privileged to associate with the commercial banks, we have problems with the judiciary, where you take a case of somebody who has not paid, and for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, you are in that court. That's not really a good way of doing business, especially when you are using collateral and it is to do with real estate. So these are some of the signals that are switched off, and they are not working, and yet the banks have some 3 trillion they want to lend, but they are just saying, well, I will not do that. And so the efforts of lowering the central bank rate, which was supposed to bring down the interest rates, has not really given us that thrust in private sector credit, because the banks are cagey. And as I was reading the monetary policy statement, I think they were very clear to say 50% of the increase has gone to just a few prime borrowers and large companies, because these are known. So we really need to fix a number of things for the signals to go through. Agnes Kirabo said the signals are not going out there, and we need different masts to get them running. Dickens, you had some issues for you, but also after it is going to be Julius, and then we'll get to Moses, who has a few things to say, including loss-making central bank. It owns them, and why doesn't it just print and pay off the losses? Moses will tell us.
Thank you very much. You know, I sometimes get worried about the way we debate taxation in this country, because everybody talks about tax. Even the civil society, I have not heard in the whole debate leading up to this budget anyone coming out to explain to the public the good tax incentives that government has put out there. The local investors in this country, we complain that the foreign investors have got incentives. But when you look at the incentives that are available, they are available for everyone. But we actually do not delve into to see. I'll give an example. We talk about taxation. When you look at our imports, the unadjustable value of the imports is about 26%. 74% largely includes a lot of untaxable items that are actually meant to boost production. But when someone wants to do business, they think about trading. You even try to import sugar, yet you know that we have surplus sugar here and you cannot compete. And I'm sorry to say that you cannot find cheap sugar in a supermarket in Uganda, cheaper than the Ugandan sugar. It's not possible. So I think that we need to explain to our people to understand what is in it for them in this budget. And that's why, as you are what you are trying to do, start on Monday, we want to do a countrywide and continuous sensitization to show people that, look, if you want to invest in productive sectors, there is something for you. The signals are very many. I don't agree that there are no signals. Secondly, the president talked about the youth, turning around the youth. And this thing is about mindset. I will give you an example. I have visited industries in Namamve where they tell you that today I get the workers come and work. The next day, people don't turn up. But if you go to Nakao Market, you park your car, you will be surrounded by 6 people with veras, everyone wanting to carry for you what you want to buy. How much will a youth earn the whole day by waiting for Dr. Biargaba to come and buy a bunch of matoka and they carry for him?
That's the signal.
It's not.
It might be a wrong one.
Yes. But so our youth, they have to turn around their energy into productive sectors. And that's why we have to look at skilling. If you look at what a normal Ugandan want to do when they want to do business, they will look for simple. Even if he has land, productive land, he will not think about what can I do with this land. The incentives are so many in agriculture. So I think the debate has to go towards how can we encourage our people to change the way they think. Talking about the tax base, widening the tax base. Yes, the registration expansion program is still on. We all know that, of course, if you look at our urban population, they have increased over the years. So what we are trying to do as URA is to match our reach in terms of the numbers, in terms of the technology, to make sure that we are able to reach each and everyone. But we need the support from everyone, including the politicians. So when we come to your constituency and we are saying that we need to register the farmers, you don't have to go on radio and say, you are a stop harassing my people. Finally, we have seen the manufacturing sector grow, there is no doubt. And I want to inform the Ugandans that we have also seen the consumption habits, patterns change. There are products which we used to import in this country many years ago that now we are getting locally. If you look at, for example, the steel sector, we are very dominant in the region, very dominant. If you decide to build and you want to go to China and import steel, you are sure that you are going to make a big loss. If you look at cement, if you look at very many other sectors, I can give examples. So there is no doubt, but I think Ugandans must understand that, first of all, you must love your products. These policies like buy Uganda, build Uganda, we are the first to despise our own. And we crave for the foreign. So we have to change our mindset and support. If someone has started a factory, he's building up something, he's producing something, support him. And support him, and when we support each other, that's how our economy will grow. Thank you.
Interesting things coming in there, and you saw the signals on the floor. Why people are vending? Because if it is true, as the gentleman said there, vendors are earning so much per day. When they go to this factory, maybe for 2 months they haven't been paid. The factories which are not paying people for many reasons. So it's also about the signal. It may not be necessarily a mindset change. These people, we need to understand their thinking and their circumstances before we can actually send the right messages. I think, as Agnes Kirabo put it, some of these signals are not getting down there. People have their different signals. We may be thinking different from them, but they're also thinking in their own ways, doing the best that they can. But that's a very good observation of people hanging around. And that's why I usually say, let's not just peg our debt to GDP, because if you have this kind of GDP that keeps running around the market, when do you catch it to use it to pay debt? They are like grasshoppers, because that's what they chase anyway, to eat and a living. Julius, what are you seeing? What are you thinking? What are you telling us?
I think for me, I think he's right on the point of trying to change the mindsets for Ugandans to love their products. I think for me that's very important, and the bubu really came into my mind, and I think one of the things this budget really needs is to look at extremely to focus more on is around how can we support our private sector to be able to manufacture. I was struck by, you know, there is this Nakasongola tomato factory that was supposed to produce tomato sauce, and it collapsed. And I had thought that actually it had collapsed simply because maybe it lacked tomatoes. But the moment it started, all farmers in Nakasongola started producing tomatoes. But it collapsed simply because of marketing. They couldn't get the market, and I think they had some management issues. And I asked myself, how much tomato do we import from abroad, this country? Why wouldn't the government support this kind of small, industry to be able to grow, to be able to produce tomato sauce and support all the farmers? So I think we need to be able to look at that perspective. But there are two important things I think which came out of the budget, which I think, music to my ears. One of them was around government this time around to go head on and deal with the issue of agencies that are duplicating services or functions. And I think having these so many authorities around ourselves, I think it is a hemorrhage to our resources. There is too much expenditure, because the mere fact that you have an authority for policy making itself would tell you that is wastage. You have URA simply because it goes ahead every day to collect money. That function can't be done by Minister of Finance. You have, Uganda Civil Aviation Authority, landing planes, taking off. That is a service they are rendering. But if you have Uganda Investment Authority, you have Uganda Export Promotion Board, then you have, all these other agencies almost doing the same things. Uganda Zonal Authority. If you can combine all these authorities into one, they can still deliver a better service. And I think from that music to my ears, I'm looking forward to that.
You see the problem, the authorities.
So yeah, I mean that's challenging.
An authority can't just disappear like that.
But again, now I heard the minister is going to revamp the idea of the microfinanced authority also. So I think for me is, we are saying, like Mo said, that the budget, we are constrained, the resources are constrained. Let us reduce the appetite, and we can reduce our appetite in terms of ensuring that the little resources we have can be prioritized in the sectors that we definitely need to look at. Lastly, for me, is the issue of taxes. And I think the signal out there really is that the Ugandans don't know the kind of incentives that we are talking about. The little we know about is that people are given that the incentives are extremely discriminatory. That is only the international people who get these incentives. It might be wrong, but also is that some of these incentives actually themselves, when you look at them, you don't want even to tamper them, because to go to them, because if they tell that to be able to be in a zone, in a free zone authority, you need to have a capital of 10 million United States dollars. Then my chairperson of Federation for Small Scale Enterprises would definitely not be able to go into those places. So let's see how we can ensure that these incentives can be able to we can be able to educate the public about them very well. But at the same time, I think the whole issue around exemptions, we need to be able to look at them, because these exemptions actually they are really hitting on your target very much. But at the same time is that these exemptions are very costly. We need to be able to see that once we give an exemption, we can be able to follow it up to ensure that the targets we gave you are the targets that we have got. That's what I can say at this particular moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really don't like eating bread, because the wheat comes from Russia. I don't know where else. Very little comes from Uganda. But I said, okay, let me buy Uganda and build Uganda. Where do I find a substitute for bread? And how easy is it to get it? And so I try to look at what we are importing in this country, and I just added up what we have imported in the different categories from 2010 to 2017. Just 7 years. Number 7 rings some nice figures for people. Vegetable products, animal beverages, fat oil, $3.2 billion of imports of vegetable oil, animal fat, beverage, and cooking oil. And yet we gave some people incentives to deal with that oil space. We are still importing cooking oil. Are we building Uganda? Prepared foodstuffs, beverages, and tobacco, we imported $1.7 billion worth. This is 2010 to 2007. Textiles, $1.2 billion. Base metals, you talk about steel, we are just doing some little value addition. We imported $2.5 billion worth of steel and base metals. We have iron and steel, and I saw in the budget speech somebody is going to start producing some iron. I think these are the areas we want to get into, because you can easily knock out these $2 billion that we are losing out to the internal, if you can be strategic in some of these issues. I want to give a slot of 5 minutes to Moses. You have had some questions come to you. Moses Bekabye, you can have some slot of 5 minutes. Other questions I said I will answer for you, but only after you have decided I should, and I will refuse when you do that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll quickly run through these questions. Let me start with the issue of industrialization for job creation and shared prosperity. What do we mean? I think we've explained this. Once you link agriculture to industry and invest in these areas that we are talking about, power, lowering the cost of electricity, rural roads, urban roads, trunk roads, water for production, okay, investing in irrigation, okay, small scale and bulk water irrigation, all these kind of things, and looking at extension of financial services, as we mentioned, improving productivity, linking urban areas to rural areas through these infrastructure investments, and linking small, medium-sized enterprises to large, both domestically and those which are outside. Then you're looking at really crowding in the people here in Uganda in terms of productivity, in terms of economic growth. So the second thing I want to quickly run to is, what is government going to do differently in terms of, to promote manufacturing? And I'll just list them. What I thought of is, if we can embrace research and adopt new technologies of doing things, I think we can do it. Lowering the cost of doing business. I will not labor on this. That my minister was here, was mentioned how government is doing that in order to lower the cost of doing business, in order for these things to be competitive. And then there is an important issue of the local content, implementing what we've been discussing with the private sector, and also looking at the legal framework and also policy and administrative issues in order to ensure that there is a significant content in terms of local content, which is also linked to the BUBU policy. I think that can also be and then also promoting joint ventures. Joint ventures is extremely critical, especially in terms of passing on the technologies, passing on the skills, the knowledge that is required to actually set up a manufacturing concern. Then the other one that I wanted to look at is continuing to invest in incubation centers. For instance, when you look at the local people who have started, for instance, packing milk or doing these other things, adding value to some of these things, some of them actually start in these incubation centers. So we need to increase these kind of facilities in order to empower the local people into the manufacturing sector. Then there is the issue of standards and certification, which is so critical. But before we go into that, when I mentioned research, when people discover something, it should be patented. In other words, if I invent something, before I scale it up, I should be able to patent this. The mechanisms are there, the standards need to be developed, and all these things need to be worked on in order for these things to happen. Okay? So and then lastly, is to try and really rethink with the private sector. That's what Mr. Negebel was saying. In terms of partnership, in terms of working together, how do we really go back to polytechnical education? Is it polytechnic? Vocational or technical skills education. How do we go back to that so that we have a Chambogo that used to churn out those technical skills that we used to know in the 80s and in the 90s? Okay? And then there is the whole issue of lowering the cost of finance, long-term finance. If we address these issues, I'm sure, and then ensure that whatever we put in the budget, because all these elements I mentioned in the budget speech, the key issue is actually implementation, to make sure that we work together in order to implement most of the things. I just want to comment very briefly on the central bank. I don't wish to think that it's broke. The central bank cannot be
certainly
broke.
not.
But the central bank can have low revenue, and because of the imbalance at times between fiscal and monetary policy, you may find that the operations of the central bank can make it can put it in a situation where it cannot adequately handle those fiscal monetary policy challenges that come with that kind of relationships. But also, the central bank, over time, because of low interest rates, they've been not making money on investment of their reserves, where they also get some bit of income. But also, they have been making investments in currency center, regional currency centers, cost of issuing currency, and all those kind of things. But the central bank is well protected by law. Both the Bank of Uganda Act, the Public Finance Management Act, and other legal avenues protect the integrity of the central bank. So the central bank, once the audit comes out for this financial year, somewhere around July, which will establish the gap that they have, by law, they'll have that gap will be closed by the Ministry of Finance. It's by law.
It's a government bank, so
yes, it's a government bank.
It will be financed adequately.
Yeah,
you're done. I want to believe.
The other issue I want to look at very quickly is the issue the gentleman talked about, postponement of investment in water and environment. I think that's what you're talking about. When you look at the budget, if you aggregate the budget and analyze it carefully, you will see that water and environment gets actually 5% of the entire budget. 5% of the entire budget. It's actually higher than in education sector. I mean agriculture. And just to mention the other sectors in terms of comparison, education is 11%, health is 9%. Okay, so this water and environment is actually 5%. And over the last 30 years, if you look at the investment that has gone in terms of financial outlays that have gone into water and the environment, it is significant. So the issue here may not be financial resources, but rather, the governance issues in these areas in order to ensure value for money and to make sure that whatever resources are put in these are effective. Okay?
Okay, thank you, Moses, for those clarifications and additions. Maybe the releases are cut. We don't know where the supplementaries come from. But that's a discussion to sort out the practicalities, but at least it is a priority sector. Richard, what would you say in 1 minute of the remaining time before I release you to get back on the 14th floor?
Well, I think the big issue for me out of all this is the issue that was raised by Agnes, which is the trickle-down effect. You know, how do we get the ordinary guy to change their, I think the president referred to it as their attitude. Is it the attitude? Their behavior to be able to join this economy and thrive and become part of it. You know, how do we commercialize their lives? How do we introduce liquidity? How do we introduce money to the economy? I think for me that continues to be the big pressing problem for Uganda. And if we can really figure that one out, then hopefully we can get many of the problems sorted out.
Shared growth and prosperity. I think that's the word. The people down need to feel the growth is happening. The people down need to get prosperous. And then your manufacturers will also survive because there will be somebody to buy whatever they are producing. Geoffrey, you have the last word. I'm giving you 1 minute. I know you can use it.
I always look for...
your microphone, please.
We always look for what some people call low-hanging fruits. What can we take away from all this? I would like that, to say that all stakeholders can go with the proposition that a conversation between the private sector and government is going to come along the lines of policy convergence. Policy needs to converge around the targets which are set out in NDP 2 and the oncoming NDP 3. And these are clearly, we see jobs taking center stage. In order to drive this, the key area here is domestic direct investment, domestic savings. This is an area which has long been ignored under the assumption that our households are $a-day households. But we all know, we have seen it in broad daylight, that the telecommunications industry has proven that our homesteads are not $a-day households. All these households require are the appropriate signals. The telecommunication signal came and the money came out of the households. Finally, the only countries which have made it, succeeded, have evolved from the economic doldrums and have made it and now called tiger economies and so on. None of them exist on the African continent. They have made it because they deliberately targeted jobs. They deliberately targeted job creation. Everything revolved around that.
Okay.
Those who continue to focus on, I think it's called the Washington
Consensus?
Washington Consensus inflation targeting, have remained behind and will really continue to remain behind.
Okay.
Life is about lessons, and I think we have learned. So we would like to have this conversation with government, and I think I can speak for the private sector. We are ready and willing, and we are ready to invest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Taxman, you have a minute.
I just want to give hope to, and maybe send a strong signal to particularly the manufacturers in this country. When you look at, you get the chance to intensive look at the budget this year, especially looking at the duty rates that have been introduced for the goods that come into this country, you will realize that we have made an effort to try and and protect our industries and protect jobs. We would like to see every time we have capacity and we have products that are able to be manufactured here, they are not exposed to the extent that the industries get threatened. So I just call upon you to look at the measures that have been introduced intensively. There are very many signals, like I said, but I also want to call upon the researchers. And when you talked about importing things like Irish potatoes in this country, we just need to do a lot in terms of the research, in terms of the improved varieties. But for the manufacturers, you can be assured that where we sit together with our colleagues in the ministry and at the ESC, we are looking at ways how we can make sure that the industries actually remain robust. And there are measures that have been introduced. And I call upon those who are listening to join URA on Monday. We shall be at Africana Hotel and in various towns in Uganda, talking deep into the budget and trying to help everyone to understand what is in it for them.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Julius, you have 20 seconds.
I think for me, one message I'm trying to for citizens is that there is much we can get from this budget. Please go to that health center and see whether the medicine has arrived. Go to that school and see whether it is functioning. Let us ensure that the little that is going to trickle down does its work. It is our duty and our responsibility to monitor budgets and ensure that we get proper service delivery. Thank you.
And where do they report when they find the health center is not functioning? Can be another matter, but at least go there and see if it's not functioning. Before the taxes come on board, you can WhatsApp. We shall pick the signal and come to that place. I want to thank everybody for being part of this, and on behalf of NTV, we want to appreciate that you've really helped the signal, not just the television signal to go down, but the content of this discussion. I found it very, very useful and interesting. I must be saying that thank you very much, NTV, for the time you have given to this, to the Ugandans, the millions of viewers. You could have decided to broadcast Russia, but you decided to broadcast Uganda. Thank you very much for being Ugandan. This is the Buy Uganda, Build Uganda. Thank you everybody for being part of this.
Thank you so much, Fred Muhumuza, for taking us through the first and the second segment. We also would like to thank you, the viewer, you, the guests, and also the panelists for making this a success. We also recognize the great contribution our sponsors have made to make this a success, and we'd like to mention them: NSSF, CS Bag, Top Finance, and the Ministry of Finance. Thank you so much for holding us and for making this a success. Tomorrow is Eid, and we'd like to also wish all the Muslims Eid Mubarak. Let's have a good night and God bless. Thank you.